Hello everyone, my name is McGinnis and I'll be talking about the need for open infrastructure. Now by this I don't mean infrastructure that's free and available for anyone to use, but rather the use of open source software to manage your infrastructure, to enable and empower the way that people are able to use that infrastructure. So infrastructure is boring. I've been working with it for over 2 decades now, but I believe by leveraging open source software, you're better able to utilize it while at the same time not needing to focus on it quite as much. You shouldn't need to be concerned about how to configure an operating system every time you need to deploy a new service. By using open source services and tools, you're able to focus on solving your unique needs. Now, what is open source? This may be a silly question to ask at an event like this, but just to cover everything, there is the open source definition, which is maintained by the Open Source Initiative. And this really defines a set of characteristics that define what is open source. And this is things like the source code. The source code needs to be available. You need to be able to look at the code and see what the software is doing. You need to be able to redistribute that software. But most of these, I think, really address the characteristics of the code itself and the project. I really like to think a little broader about the community and ecosystem around open source. Now, I've been involved in the OpenStack community for quite a while now, and within OpenStack we have what we call the 4 opens. And these are a set of principles that really define the culture within OpenStack. Things like open source, that the product of this community is open source software. But there's also open design and open development. And this means that no one is behind closed doors coming up with plans of how things need to be. No one is implementing something in private and then releasing it once they think everything is done. All of these decisions in the code implementation and the reasoning for making certain choices are all done openly for anyone to see, which I think really leads to the last open community, that this is open for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're in a certain geographic location or if you are an employee of a specific company. Anybody can participate here. Everything is done in the open and anyone can get involved. And this really has a lot of benefits. This way, we're able to get the knowledge of anybody and the experience. No matter where they are and what their background is, they're able to participate and bring that to the community. Another one is vendors. And this is something that's been a little controversial with some people, but I really believe this is important, especially with an infrastructure project like OpenStack, that vendors need to be able to participate. They're the experts on their network devices and server hardware and storage systems. So by them being able to participate in the community, they're able to bring that expertise in and really make sure that the way that things are integrated really do work well with the equipment that someone will be using. And just the access for everyone, being able to participate, whether they have experience as a developer or just a system administrator or even someone that just has some interest. They're able to bring in their unique experience into the community. Now, there is also the idea of open hardware, and there's some really interesting things that have been done with open hardware in the last several years. But for the most part, from what I'm referring to in this talk, it's around open source software and how that's used to manage the hardware. Whether that hardware is open hardware or a proprietary device. So what does this have to do with infrastructure? Open source software is great. Who cares for infrastructure? I think one of the key things is it brings choice. If you're using a major public cloud provider's infrastructure, you're really restricted to what they want to make available to you. Using open source software, there are all kinds of options. Ceph for storage, Calico for networking, Ironic for managing your bare metal servers. All of these components coming together to enable things like OpenStack and Kubernetes that really manage your infrastructure as a whole and make that available. Things like Terraform and Chef and other ways that you can programmatically, declaratively state what your infrastructure needs to be for your specific use case. This choice makes it very flexible. It makes me think back to, and sorry, this is an American reference, but with AT&T. AT&T was a monopoly in the United States for quite a while. And there's some benefits to that. AT&T's Bell Labs did some amazing things, and I really think we wouldn't be where we are today without some of that. But because of this monopoly, they really could decide what services were made available by who and what it would cost. So for quite a while, even to use the telephone network, a customer would have to pay a monthly fee to use one of AT&T's telephones. It wasn't until the late 60s that regulators finally forced this to be opened up to allow any devices to be plugged in. Now, without this, we wouldn't have been able to connect modems and use this infrastructure for all kinds of things that we do today. So that choice, that ability to decide how you're going to use it is very important. You know, those major public cloud providers today aren't going to lock you down and only allow you to use applications that they provide. They're not going to inspect everything that you put out there. But it really is a trade-off. You are limiting some of your capabilities to what they decide they want to provide. Whether that's what kind of hardware, CPUs and GPUs they choose to make available, or what kind of additional services. So by using open infrastructure, you're able to make those decisions yourself and really optimize your infrastructure for your specific needs. And that really also provides a lot of flexibility. A lot of this code can be run on something as simple as a Raspberry Pi. And that same code can be configured and deployed and used to manage an entire data center. You have the choice and you have the flexibility to adapt that infrastructure and that software to your specific environment and your specific needs. Now, this quote really stood out to me. Verizon Media uses OpenStack to manage a lot of their infrastructure, and James Pinnock manages a team there that does this. So at the Open Infrastructure Summit in Denver a couple of years back, he gave a keynote, and this quote stood out. He said, someone in the world is making his infrastructure better. He went on to elaborate. He knew that when his team goes to bed, someone somewhere was waking up and contributing to the code and fixing bugs and making it better. And then when they went to sleep, his team would be waking up and doing the same thing. And it's really getting this benefit from everybody working together on a common solution that makes things so much better. And that's what we refer to as a force multiplier. These teams probably could do a lot of the stuff on their own They could implement their own systems, and there are many people that have done various ways of automating their infrastructure. But then they're limited to what that team can do. By doing this in the open and working with others, that accelerates and just makes it so much more can be done. Which reminds me of a popular phrase that we use in the open source community. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Really, by working together, it may take a little longer to come to agreement and really decide on the best way to do something. But then, so much more can be done. And the system is so much better in the end, more robust, managing more use cases, that really you get much further than you would on your own. Good example is back before around 2010, when NASA was implementing their own code to be able to manage some of their infrastructure, and some folks at Rackspace were doing the same. Now, luckily, these two groups were able to discover each other and talk about what they were doing. And they made the decision that rather than doing their own thing, they could combine forces and come together and actually work on implementing this as a community. And this started OpenStack in 2010. And it grew from there. Because this was done in the open, more people were able to participate. Just starting with Nova and Swift early on, people were able to add more capabilities, add more code, make things better. So starting with just Nova, eventually realizing that, okay, there are different pieces of this that are important. So things like Neutron being pulled out of Nova to be able to manage networking, and Cinder being same thing, separated and focusing just on managing block storage. Ironic for managing bare metal servers. So because of all of the different groups of people being involved in different interest areas and different focuses, they are able to grow OpenStack to meet different needs. Even today, just in the last development cycle that we called Victoria, there were over 160 different organizations that were involved, with contributions coming from over 790 people. That's a lot of knowledge and expertise that are being brought into the community. And it's grown to cover all kinds of areas. So no matter what your needs are, whether it's a small server running in the corner of your office or running large environments, you can take pieces from these different projects and configure it exactly how you need it to be. This success has grown the OpenStack Foundation to the point where now they've just recently been renamed the Open Infrastructure Foundation to really reflect that the focus isn't just on OpenStack and that specific software, but really enabling any projects, any communities that are doing that work of implementing code, implementing new solutions to make better ways of managing your infrastructure. Whether that's something low level like Kata containers, of being able to run containers with the security of virtual machines, or Airship, which you can use to manage the entire life cycle of your infrastructure. And that community is just growing. The software has grown to the point where it's being used by public cloud providers, whether that's City Network or OVH. There are providers all across Europe, all across the world, that are able to take the things that are being done in the open infrastructure community and using that to provide services and make those capabilities available to everybody. And as a consumer of those services, I am able to write something to work on the OpenStack cloud in my office and have that same experience of taking that and running it on someone else's public infrastructure. So OpenStack itself does manage bare metal, virtual machines, and containers. But really, if you want to think about it, it's infrastructure as a service. So to enable an entire stack to just be able to run a web server, there are all these components that need to be in place. Now, if you were just to do this on your own, you'd have to manage each piece of this stack to be able to do that final piece of running that software to expose that web server. But OpenStack allows you to focus just on that upper part, the parts that actually are important to you. And then just having those APIs and user interface to be able to manage the lower half without needing to go into the data center and configure things and move things around every time you want to make a change. There are nice integrations with other tools. There is a user interface, but really it comes down to having these APIs. You can make API calls for each of these pieces of your infrastructure that you need to manage. Now, another good example is Google, and this is slightly different. So, unlike Nova and Rackspace coming together and deciding to create something new, Google had this great internal system that they developed for running their own infrastructure called Borg. And they shared this starting in early 2000s, but then realizing this was something kind of special, something great that they could share with everybody. And yeah, they have other motives for doing things, but they recognize that making this open source, making it available for everyone, could really change the way that people approach applications and how they're deployed and how they're managed. So, this is a talk about infrastructure, and some would argue that Kubernetes is above the infrastructure layer. But really, if you look at all those layers, the more capabilities develop and the more functionality is there, the higher we're able to raise that bar of where infrastructure is. So Kubernetes obviously has been very successful. A huge community has grown around it with CNCF. So now there are all kinds of open source components that you could use for monitoring and creating your applications and everything. But I like to think of it still, Kubernetes itself, as part of the infrastructure. It's a platform as a service providing more of that functionality, but it's just raising that bar a little bit higher of what part of your infrastructure can be automated and what part do you actually need to focus on. And that just makes it better for the user, that there isn't this need to know about everything underneath. They can focus more and more on the specific things that are adding value to them or their company. And one of the other things that I think has gotten better, but I do want to mention that there used to be a lot of this Kubernetes versus OpenStack. But I think this is important to think about as well. Like I mentioned, with choices and having others make decisions for you. Kubernetes is something that needs to run on top of actual physical infrastructure. So you can certainly run Kubernetes on a public cloud, but you do have the choice to run Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. So you can keep that control and that choice and know what is in your infrastructure and what hardware is available, and use the best of both of these to really make a complete environment that you can make work exactly how you need it to. And a lot of this is all about the API enablement. By having these APIs, whether that's down with configuring how your networking connects together, all the way up to how your applications communicate with each other and how they get deployed, that enables things like Terraform, where it is really this infrastructure as code. That is the important part of having all of these components in place, is that with something like Terraform, just as an example, you're able to have source code, define what your infrastructure needs to look like in code, in YAML files, in a way that is declaring what you need. And then that can use those APIs to actually provide that. You don't need to go into the data center and move cables around and reconfigure things and go into BIOS settings. It's all done for you, and you just need to focus on stating what you need and what your application expects to have available. And the other thing that I think is really important about all of this, whether you're, having this infrastructure as code, having all of these services available, having them open means they're accessible. It means they're available to anyone, anywhere. And this is important. One of the big challenges as things evolve rapidly is you need the expertise. You need someone that knows how to use these systems. And a lot of that is helped, I think, by having access to this technology. So as students grow up and learn, they can actually look at the code and see how things are done. They can learn from that. So that made me realize, I read this quote, reading about technology education, and they said ensuring students have opportunities to use technology in powerful ways will also contribute to creating more equitable learning environments. This, I think, is really important, right? And something that we may not think about as much. There are free accounts that you can get and use different services that are managed by somebody else. But having that ability to actually access the code, actually participate if there's interest. So someone even at the high school level can learn about these things and get involved. And they don't need to just depend on trying to find their way into that first job that it's going to give them the training that they need or give them the accounts to be able to access things. Having open source software and using open source software for your infrastructure means that that's available for anyone to learn and use, and then have more people that can contribute to that and make that better and make it more accessible to others. So it's kind of the idea of the force multiplication with the software development, but force multiplication of that expertise and learning and accessibility to anyone, not restricting who can learn and who has access to new technology. So I think all of this, it's for open infrastructure, and why I think it's really important to use open source software to manage infrastructure. It's really having that choice, having control over what is there, what you can use, having the flexibility to adapt that, whether that is just a single server that you're running to try things out or to meet your specific needs, all the way up to becoming a cloud provider, making those services available for everyone, either publicly or inside your company, having this infrastructure in place, having this way that they can consume it, and having the access that anyone can get in, get involved, learn about what it does, how it works. And that's the force multiplication that benefits the software, it benefits the users, and it benefits the people trying to do the next big thing and create, focus on new solutions and new capabilities that's going to benefit everybody. So I hope you think about how open infrastructure can be used in your environment and what that means to you, and how this can really how the work that you're doing can benefit others as well. Thank you.
John, welcome to Athens, at least virtually.
Thanks. Glad
Have
to
you
be able to participate.
have you traveled to Athens recently? Well,
No, unfortunately, I haven't. I really wish I could have.
well, I hope we'll see you here soon, perhaps in a future conference, or maybe on a holiday. But a lot of what you said kind of struck a chord in the sense of it's very much the essence of openness and open source, where everyone can contribute, everyone has access, and the cost of doing things has significantly reduced. How might we, do you think, achieve more youthful people, youngsters, high schools? How might we achieve having an OpenStack infrastructure in every high school, so that a child can practice and get their hands sticky with all the operational stuff that they'll have to encounter in time, right? Although if GPT-3 has anything to do with it, all we'll need to do is talk into something and they'll create the server infrastructure for us. But I'm interested to hear how we might approach that.
Yeah, that would be great. I know today we're probably a ways to be able to get something like that going. Within the OpenStack community and other open source communities I've been involved with, there are at least programs like Outreachy and other smaller efforts that are working closer with universities to try to actually get programs in place so that for someone going through a computer science degree program, they're not just working on little projects that they come up with in class, but they actually have the opportunity to participate in OpenStack or other places and work on code that people will actually use, which gives them great experience in real world software development. So whether they continue on and work on OpenStack, or they end up going to a company and doing proprietary development, they've had that exposure and they get the access to learning what other people are doing and how software development works in a collaborative fashion. So I'm hoping that we'll see that expand and be a more common program that's done in universities, and then hopefully even start to be used more at the high school level for those interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one very good option for not only for the high school students, but also for all of us. I mean, our age group and our generation is perhaps get involved in projects like, Code for Greece or Code for America or Code for Your City, where you're using these collaborative tool sets and tools available, server farms, etc., to get your hands around this. Too often, I even think, even still in the corporate world, we see these monolithic infrastructures where things are not as distributed as they could be, and it's always a big challenge. Are you seeing a significant kind of increase in the use of these techs?
I think so. Yeah, it seems like use is increasing, and I'm hoping that leads to more people being able to have access to that and use it and learn some of these more modern software development ideas, rather than, like you say, some of the older legacy monolithic type of applications that a lot of us are very used to. And hopefully we'll have another newer generation coming along that has better ideas, and we, the older ones can keep up with that and still, for our own sake, have access to these types of environments where we can continue to learn ourselves.
Give me 3 top tips then for someone to start in OpenStack.
For getting involved in OpenStack, I'd say really the best thing is to think about what areas of infrastructure or what areas of an open source project are interesting to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be writing code. It could be improving documentation on something that, if you're someone new and you're reading about how something is done and it's not quite clear to you, if you figure out how it actually works, it'd be great to improve whatever documentation is out there. Getting involved in whether it's on a mailing list or IRC for OpenStack or another project with Slack, getting on those communication channels and being able to ask questions directly I think a lot of new people are intimidated to ask questions about how something works or what they can do. But open source communities, I hope most will find are very welcoming. So I would say if you're nervous about that, just go out there and ask your question, and most likely you'll have someone that's very willing to help you.
Sean,
and
what is the low-hanging fruit? What is the low-hanging fruit for someone to get involved?
I think that really depends on which area you look at. There are different projects that have that try to keep a list of some of those low-hanging fruit things, whether it's bug fixes or missing documentation that they just need someone to actually go and write things down. So again, asking on the mailing list or asking in a chat type channel of introducing yourself, say, hey, I'm someone new here and I'm looking for some low-hanging fruit I can work on. Most likely you'll get someone that will give you some suggestions, and then maybe you can find something that might be a great fit for the types of things that you want to do.
And do you have any favorite kind of social impact projects that use OpenStack or based on OpenStack that you could refer to?
There are some really good ones out there. So I think if someone is interested and wants to get involved, asking around, seeing what's available, there's some really cool stuff they could work on.
Sean, any final remarks you'd like to make for the Greek ecosystem? I mean, we're definitely growing. There's a lot of amazing projects happening locally, and really making our mark on the world. This conference is happening for the second time, amongst a few other conferences, which are doing really well, and the communities that support this event are growing, ever growing. So any final remarks before we let you go?
I'd just say that I've had the opportunity now to meet a few people in the community there, and I'm really excited to see what can come out of there. A lot of great, smart people. So I'm glad to see events like this taking place. I hope this continues every year and helps encourage the growth of that community.
And Sean, where are you right now? Where are you located?
I'm in Minnesota in the United States.
Thank you very, very much for that opening keynote, and I hope we can welcome you back in Athens in the flesh at some point in the near future.
Let's hope so. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All righty. So that was Sean McGinnis, an OpenStack expert, opening our conference, and thank you very much, Sean, for that.